Emma Johnson stormed down the jet's aisle and snapped, "This isn't your jet," just as the cabin lights caught the edges of her $2.10 billion ownership certificates, sending the crew into stunned silence. The flight attendants froze mid-step, eyes wide as if they'd seen a ghost. The captain's voice crackled through the intercom, hesitant and unsteady. "Ma'am, please sit down." Emma didn't sit. She planted her feet beside seat 1 to see and held the framed certificate high, her heart hammering. The certificate bore her name in elegant script and the seal of Aurora Air's board of directors. It meant she owned this entire jet, every leather seat, every overhead bin, every engine. A timid attendant named Rosa edged forward, her voice trembling. "Miss Johnson, you're our passenger today." "This is a commercial flight," Emma cut her off. "I know exactly what this is. I bought your company last month. I own this jet, this company, and soon I'll own every airline that dares to stand in my way." A collective gasp rippled through the cabin. The other passengers craned their necks, whispering. A businessman in a grey suit clutched his newspaper. A mother soothed her crying toddler. They looked as if they had just learned they were passengers on an alien spacecraft. The captain's intercom crackled again. "Ms. Johnson, you can't just take over a flight in mid-air. It's illegal." Emma pressed her thumb against the glass of the certificate frame and slid it open. She extracted the glossy paper and waved it. "Check the date, June 1st. The board signed it. I'm the majority shareholder. Your pilot's salary, your fuel costs all paid by me." The captain's voice wavered. "But what about the lease agreements? The FAA regulations?" Emma's lips curved into a tight smile. "Irrelevant. I have lawyers drafting new contracts as we speak." The attendant Rosa's face paled. She glanced at her uniform badge, then at the certificate in Emma's hand. "This is real." Emma's gaze softened for a moment. "Real and long overdue." Rosa swallowed hard. "Then, what do you want from us?" Emma's eyes flicked toward the cockpit door. "I want answers. Why did my flight get diverted? Why did the crew refuse my check-in at Orlando? And why is someone following me?" A murmur of confusion spread. The crew exchanged worried glances. Suddenly, the door at the back of the cabin jolted open. 2 men in dark suits, her private security, stepped in. Their earpieces glinted, and they moved with silent precision. One scanned the cabin, eyes sharp as a hawk's. Emma felt a flicker of relief. She turned back to the startled crew. "You see them? They've been tailing me since Miami. Last night, someone broke into my suite and stole my personal files." The flight attendant at seat 14B, a young man named Tariq, spoke up from his jump seat. "Miss Johnson, we had no orders to assist your security detail. Our instructions were to treat you as any first-class passenger." Emma's jaw clenched. "Exactly. You treated me like a stranger, not the owner." Rosa swallowed. "Captain, we need guidance." The captain hesitated, then sighed heavily. "Proceed with your questions, Ms. Johnson. But if you can't remain calm, I'll have to contact air traffic control." Emma nodded. "First, why did the flight plan change from Miami to Orlando?" The co-pilot, pale behind his headset, cleared his throat. "Orders came from corporate. They said to reroute due to a technical assessment, but I never saw the paperwork." Emma's heart pounded. "Technical assessment? My jet is brand new. It passed every test. Someone lied." Rosa glanced at Emma's security. "Should we check the maintenance logs?" Emma shook her head. "No, we're going higher. I need to know who's behind this." She walked toward the galley at the front, her security close behind. The crew shuffled, uneasy at her boldness. The other passengers sat frozen, watching every step dot in the galley. Emma rifled through the private service champagne flutes, silver trays until she found a hidden panel beneath the counter. She flipped it open, revealing a slim slot with a blinking red light beside it. Her heart thudded. "This is a tracker." The captain and crew crowded in. "Looks like a covert transmitter," the captain muttered. He tapped the red light. "Never seen this on a commercial jet." Emma signaled to her head of security, Damon. Damon bent and quietly removed the module. He passed it to Emma, who held it up like evidence in a courtroom. "This device has been monitoring my personal communications since I boarded," she said, "and it wasn't installed by you." A tremor ran through the cabin. A wealthy businessman in 15A swallowed hard. He reached for his phone. Rosa gestured to him to stop. Alarm bells rang in Emma's mind. Her enemies were closer than she thought, maybe. One of these passengers had arranged the tracking device. She scanned the faces. the businessman in a bespoke suit, the elderly couple in the exit row, the nervous teenager with a laptop. Anyone could be a traitor. Emma's chest tightened with betrayal. She had trusted her own company's crew. Now they seemed as alien as any spy. "Everyone, I need you to remain seated," Emma announced. Her voice was calm but carried a steely edge. "We're investigating sabotage. No one leaves their seat until we find the culprit." Murmurs turned to tense silence. Below her feet, the engines hummed steadily. The jet sliced through the clear blue sky. But inside, trust had fractured. Every heartbeat echoed with suspicion. Rosser turned to the captain. "What's our nearest airport?" The captain checked his instruments. "We're over Alabama. Closest field is Birmingham, but we'd have to divert. It's better to complete the flight to Orlando." Emma cut him off. "No, I want Birmingham. Bring us down now." The captain swallowed. "Yes, Miss Johnson." Emma stowed the tracker in her purse and turned to face her crew. "You said someone stole my files last night. Who knew about my schedule?" The attendant Tariq looked uneasy. "Only Ops Control," and he hesitated. "Ops Control." Emma's voice tightened. "Who in Ops Control had the motive to stop me from reaching Orlando?" Silence. Then, a soft click echoed from row 17. Emma whirled. The nervous teenager with a laptop was frantically shutting a compartment beneath her seat. Emma's pulse spiked. She strode toward the girl. "Don't move." The girl froze, eyes wide. She held up a small metallic cylinder with wires. Emma's breath caught. "What is that?" The girl's voice trembled. "An ignition trigger." A frozen hush fell. The cylinder looked like a harmless gadget, but Emma knew at once it could set off an explosion. Emma's mind raced. How many more devices were hidden on this jet? Who was the mastermind? "Everyone, stay calm," Emma commanded. Her voice rang clear. "Security, disarm it." Damon and his partner knelt beside the teenager and gently pried the wires apart. Sparks danced. A hiss of relief when the gadget went dark. Emma exhaled, her legs trembling. She turned to the terrified passengers. "I'm sorry. None of you should fear for your lives." The mother clutched her toddler tighter. The businessman's face went white. Rosa dabbed her forehead with a napkin. Emma squared her shoulders. "We land in 10 minutes. You'll all get off safely. But someone on this flight tried to kill me and perhaps you too. After we land, I will find out who." She took a deep breath and stepped back to the center aisle. The jet began its descent. Shuddering slightly as the speed changed, Emma watched the runway lights grow bigger in the windows. She thought of her daughter waiting for her at home, of the promise she'd made to protect her family and her empire. Her chest burned with betrayal and fear, but also with resolve. The jet's wheels kissed the tarmac with a jolt. A cheer rose from the relieved crew. Emma allowed a small, fierce smile. But as the cabin doors slid open, a cold thought froze her blood. Whoever tried to kill her had known every move, and they were still out there. What now? Emma wondered as she stepped onto the runway under the certificate safe in her grip, and the mystery only beginning. Emma stood on the tarmac beneath the harsh floodlights, feeling the night air press against her skin as she surveyed the jet that had almost become her tomb and then her salvation when her security team had disarmed the device that threatened to rip her world apart. And she knew that what came next would decide the fate of her company and her life, and she refused to be a victim. Ever again inside the cabin, the crew gathered in hushed clusters, exchanging anxious glances as the passengers stepped out one by one, their faces etched with relief and fear and guilt, as though each of them wondered if they had played a part in the plot to end Emma's reign before it had truly begun. Damon approached Emma, his suit jacket still dusted with the fine grit of the runway and his eyes hard with determination, as he whispered that the device bore the trademarks of a saboteur with military training, and that their next move had to be swift and precise if they were to uncover the mastermind who had betrayed her in the dead of night. Emma nodded her head, her mind racing through the events that had led her here, from the boardroom battles to the stolen files to the fiery confrontation in the aisle of her own jet, and she realized that the battle for her legacy was only just beginning, and that she would have to wield her power like a blade if she hoped to emerge victorious. Cabin door hissed shut behind the last passenger, and Emma turned to the captain, whose face was drawn with exhaustion and fear, and she spoke with a voice that brooked no refusal, demanding that he inform air traffic control of a security breach and divert the jet to a secure hangar under the jurisdiction of her personal security detail, the captain's. voice cracked as he replied that protocol dictated he report only to the FAA, but Emma cut him off with the fierce glare of a woman who had seen her world nearly collapse, and she reminded him that she held the ownership certificate in her hand, and that he would comply or face charges of obstruction and endangerment. Shiver rippled through the crew, and the captain swallowed hard before keying the microphone to declare an emergency security landing at Birmingham International Airport, where Emma's team would meet the jet on the tarmac and surrounded with unmarked vehicles and armored personnel carriers to ensure that no one could interfere with the investigation. High above the runway, Emma's co-pilot adjusted their descent path as the jet banked gently toward the runway lights that glowed like beacons of a battle to come, and Emma felt her pulse quicken as she gripped the certificate that had become both her weapon and her shield, and she vowed to uncover every secret and expose every liar, no matter how deep their conspiracy. Damon contacted headquarters through a secure channel and ordered a complete sweep of the jet for hidden cameras and listening devices, and told Emma that he had scrambled a forensics team to meet them on the ground, ready to analyze every fingerprint, fiber and data trace left behind by the saboteur. Turned her gaze to the cockpit, where the co-pilot's hands danced over the controls like a pianist on a grand stage, and she realized with a flash of insight that the plot must have begun long before she boarded in Miami, that someone on the inside had known her itinerary, her vulnerabilities, and had woven a trap so intricate that even her own security had been caught off guard. The jet's wheels touched down with a muted thud, and the cabin lights dimmed as the crew prepared for the final taxi, and Emma straightened her posture, her suit jacket crisp in the artificial light, and she thought of her daughter waiting at home, safe in the arms of a babysitter who believed her mother was simply on a routine business trip. The thought of her daughter's innocent smile steeled Emma's resolve, and she knew that she would not rest until she had dismantled the network of deceit that threatened her family, her fortune, and her future. The cabin door opened once more, and Emma led her team into the narrow corridor while the crew stood back with fearful respect, as if they were witnessing the birth of a new leader forged in the crucible of betrayal. The tarmac outside the unmarked SUVs glinted under the floodlights, and a line of forensic vans idled silently, engines humming with purpose, and Emma surveyed the scene like a general preparing for siege, and she felt a surge of adrenaline at the thought that soon she would have answers and the power to punish those who had dared to cross her. But first, she would need to question every member of her staff, from the ground ops team in Miami to the maintenance crew who signed off on her jet hours before departure, and to the executives in corporate headquarters who might have whispered lies behind her back to undermine her authority. Emma's security detail sealed off the perimeter and ushered the crew outside, where they waited, trembling beneath the glare of the floodlights, while Damon and two skilled interrogators led Emma back inside the jet to conduct the initial interviews in the controlled environment of the cabin that had almost become her coffin. The first to be questioned was Rosa, the lead flight attendant, whose loyalty had cracked the moment Emma unveiled her certificate, yet who had stood firm enough to call for calm when panic threatened to spiral out of control. And Emma knew she had to start with the person who had been closest to the first act of betrayal. Ma motioned for Damon to record the session, and then turned to Rosa, her gaze steady and unyielding, as she asked in a tone that carried both steel and hurt how long Rosa had known about the reroute who had issued the fake maintenance orders, and whether anyone on the flight deck had been promised a large sum of money to look the other way. Rosa's eyes flickered with fear and pain as she pressed her hands together inside her uniform pockets, and then swallowed hard and said that she had received a late-night text from a private number instructing her to delay Emma's check-in and to reroute the flight under the guise of a technical inspection, and that the message had come from someone claiming to be from corporate security, but she had recognized the writing style as one belonging to an executive who had lost a battle for control of the boardroom. Felt her stomach twist as she realized the betrayal reached higher than she had imagined, and that someone within her own inner circle had turned against her for reasons that must have been more personal than professional. She pressed Rosa further until the attendant broke down sobbing, admitting that the executive had threatened to expose a family scandal from Emma's past if she did not comply, and that the tracker and the device in row 17 had been planted to scare her into abandoning her bid for full control of the company. Emma closed her eyes for a moment, the weight of the revelation crashing down on her, and then she opened them with a fierce clarity and declared that she would find that executive and expose every single lie and every hidden shame, and that her revenge would be swift and devastating. As Emma stepped out of the cabin, into the cold night air, her team flanked her like guardians of her wrath, and she looked down the line of SUVs and forensic vans, and felt the electricity of impending battle coursing through her veins, and she knew that tomorrow the world would see the true power of a woman who refused to be cornered, and who would stop at nothing to claim her rightful place. Emma lifted her face to the night sky, and let the roar of engines and the hum of generators fill her senses, and she whispered to herself a vow that rang clear and unstoppable in the darkness, that she would not only survive this betrayal, but she would rise above it, more powerful and more unbreakable than ever before. And somewhere in the shadows the mastermind waited, unaware that the hunt had already begun, and that no secret would remain hidden for long. Ma climbed into the lead SUV, and felt the engine rumble beneath her as the convoy rolled toward headquarters in silence, broken only by the steady hum of tires on tarmac, and she kept her gaze fixed on the flickering runway lights, as if they held the secrets she needed to expose next. At the secure compound, Emma stepped out into a courtyard lined with dark windows and shadowed figures watching from afar, and she led Damon and her interrogators through sliding doors into a stark conference room, where a long table waited under a single overhead light, and the air smelled of polished steel and tension. The team guided Rosa to a seat, and then summoned the chief of maintenance, who arrived sweating in a grease-stained uniform, and Emma studied his trembling hands and hollow eyes, and she asked without hesitation how he had been bribed to sign off on the jet's safety, and whether he had been threatened with harm to his family, and he swallowed hard and confessed that he had received an anonymous voice message warning that his daughter would be hurt if he did not comply, and that the same message had ordered him to plant a false report of a faulty hydraulic system to delay Emma's arrival. Emma listened without fear and let her anger burn, and then she pivoted to demand to know who controlled the anonymous line, and he shook his head and stuttered that he did not know the caller, only that the voice had sounded like someone he once trusted in corporate security, and that he believed the orders came from higher up, but he could not identify the person. Damon leaned forward, his expression unreadable, and pressed the maintenance chief for any detail, no matter how small, and the man hesitated, and then admitted that before the device in row 17 had been activated, he had seen a flash of gold cufflinks as someone slipped past him in the hangar late at night, and that the silhouette had seemed impossibly familiar. Emma's heart jolted at the hint of familiarity, and she closed her eyes for a heartbeat to steady herself, and then she opened them and declared that they would review every video feed from the hangar and compare the gait of every executive who had visited that night, and she vowed to uncover the traitor by dawn. As the maintenance chief was escorted away, Emma's phone buzzed, and she glanced down to see a message from an unknown number quoting her mother's name and promising that if she continued the investigation, her past would be revealed to the world, and Emma's blood ran cold at the reminder that the conspiracy was not only about power, but about destroying her legacy and her family's name. Looked up at Damon, and her voice rang clear and unwavering, and she said that they would press on without hesitation, and that no threat would stop her from finding justice. And then she stepped out of the conference room into the cold corridor, and felt the weight of the coming storm settle around her, and in the distance she heard a soft click of footsteps approaching in darkness, and she turned with her hand on her holster, ready for the confrontation that would change everything. Breath caught as the footsteps grew louder in the dark corridor, and she tightened her grip on her holster, ready to face whoever had breached her. In her sanctum the figure stepped into the pale glow of the emergency light, and Emma's heart thundered when she recognized the face of Tessa Hart, the senior interrogator who had questioned Rosa and the maintenance chief. Tessa's eyes gleamed with an intensity Emma had mistaken for dedication, and now that light looked predatory as Tessa raised a slim data pad and tapped the screen. Emma swallowed the shock that flooded her chest and forced her voice steady as she demanded why Tessa was here, and Tessa's lips curved into a cold smile that Emma had never seen before. Tessa folded her arms and spoke with a calm that sent chills down Emma's spine. "You think I am here to help you?" Emma's pulse raced as she realized the betrayal ran deeper than she had feared. "You have no idea how much power you wasted on trivial attacks." Tessa's gaze flicked to the door behind Emma, and for a moment Emma's mind raced with panic at the thought of her daughter and her empire dangling on a thread. Emma stepped back, her voice a low threat. "Explain yourself." Tessa's smirk widened, and she tapped the datapad again, and a feed flickered. to life on the glass wall, showing a live video of Emma's daughter sleeping in her bedroom. Ma's heart froze as she recognized her home and her child, and her world narrowed to the single horrifying truth that her daughter was in Tessa's hands. Tessa's voice echoed in the silence. "My dear Emma, you should have chosen your allies more carefully. The sabotage, the threats, even the tracer in your jet, all designed to distract you, while I secured your greatest weakness." Mies trembled, but she forced herself to stand tall, and her eyes blazed with fury and fear. "You will never touch her." Tessa laughed softly and raised a finger to her temple. "She is already gone, Emma, and not even your billion-dollar empire can buy her back." Blood ran cold as the video feed cut off, leaving only the dark corridor and the echo of Tessa's betrayal. She stared at Tessa, ready to draw her weapon, and Tessa stepped back, pressing a button on her cuff. The lights flickered and the heavy steel door slammed shut between them, and Emma pounded against it, her voice raw with rage. "Open this door!" But the lock clicked and the wall panel slid across her view, cutting off the corridor, and Emma realized with a sickening certainty that Tessa had locked her inside the interrogation room and fled with her daughter. Her heart pounded like a hammer, and her mind raced through every moving part of the conspiracy, and she knew that the mastermind had outmaneuvered her and taken her most precious treasure. Emma slid to the floor, her back against the cold wall, and she let the weight of despair wash over her for a brief moment, until resolve flared in her chest, and she whispered to herself, "They will pay." She pressed her ear to the door, listening for any sign of passage, and heard only the distant hum of generators and the faint murmur of voices walking away. Her fingers curled around her holster as she rose to her feet, and she paced the small room, mapping every inch of the walls and the vents and the air ducts where she might slip through. Emma's mind spun with plans for escape, for retaliation, for rescue, and she knew that part of her had to go on alone into the darkness to bring her daughter home and to bring down the traitor who had shattered her trust. She found a narrow grate at the base of the wall and pried it loose with her fingernails, her muscles burning with effort as she pulled it free, and the opening revealed a crawlspace filled with dusty wiring. Without hesitation, Emma slipped inside the crawlspace, her suit jacket snagging on the metal, and she forced her legs to move forward inch by inch, guided by the faint glow of emergency strips lining the tunnel. Each breath felt heavy with adrenaline and dread, and she could hear her own heartbeat drumming in her ears as she crawled toward the control room, where Tessa must be holding her daughter. Emma's fingers brushed against the loose wire, and sparks flickered, but she clenched her teeth and pressed on, determined that no hallway lock would stop her, and no dark room would silence her. The tunnel turned sharply, and she caught a glimpse of light at the end, and she pushed forward, her mind honing in on her daughter's cries that echoed faintly through the walls. Emerged into a dimly lit service corridor, her clothes streaked with dust and her eyes fierce with purpose, and she steadied herself before stepping out into the unknown and facing the darkness head-on, because the next moment would decide whether she remained a powerless victim or became the storm that would consume her enemies and bring her child home. And as the door ahead swung open on its own, Emma squared her shoulders and whispered her promise to the night. "I will not fail." Ma pressed her back against the cold metal wall of the service corridor and let her breath steady as she recalled every lesson in stealth and tactics she had learned during her years building her empire. And then she edged forward, her senses sharp for any hint of movement ahead, where Tessa must be holding her daughter hostage in a room sealed tighter than a vault, and time slipping away with every heartbeat ticking toward disaster. She moved down the corridor, her hands brushing over the vents that hummed with the flow of climate control, and she paused at a junction where two paths split like a cruel choice, and she knew instinctively she had to trust her gut, leading her toward the left, where the faint echo of her daughter's sobs had bounced off the walls earlier and drew her forward in a silent race against the darkness. As she rounded the corner, she spotted a security camera perched high on the wall, its lens aimed directly at a pair of heavy doors marked VIP only, and she crouched low and studied the panel beside it, where a keypad glowed with a red light, signaling that she needed the code to enter. But instead, she scanned the wires trailing beneath the panel, her fingers nimble as she identified the live feed cable, and then she pulled her pocket knife and sliced through the sheath around the cable, exposing the colored wires within. And she grasped two wires between her fingertips and pressed them together with a spark of electricity flashing in the dim light, and the keypad's glow shifted to green, and the panel clicked open, granting her access to the controls she needed to slip inside without alerting Tessa, to her approach, Emma slid through the doors into a room lined with screens displaying feeds from every corner of the compound, and she recognized instantly the feed from her daughter's bedroom, where the child sat huddled on the floor, clutching a doll whose button eyes seemed to watch Emma with silent hope. And Emma felt her chest tighten with both relief and desperation, and she raced to the console and searched rapidly through the menu until she located the lock override for the room across the hall labeled secure hold, and she tapped the override command and heard a soft clunk as the door latch released, and she darted back into the corridor, her footsteps muffled by the thick carpet, and she pressed her ear against the secure hold door, listening to the muffled voices inside the room. Emma could make out Tessa's voice, cold and triumphant, as she paced before a blindfolded figure with small shoulders and tiny hands bound loosely but tightly enough to prevent escape, and Emma's heart clenched at the sight of her daughter kneeling on the floor, clutching a piece of paper that fluttered as if it were fragile as her child's hope, and Emma could see the tears glistening on her daughter's cheeks, illuminated by the single overhead lamp casting long shadows on the walls. Ma drew in a breath, and threw the door open, a breathless command bursting from her lips, telling Tessa to let her daughter go. As she stormed into the room, her eyes blazing with fury and fear, and she appeared at her daughter's side and pulled the blindfold free and swept her into her arms, sheltering her against the beat of her heart. And her daughter's small body trembled, but she clung to her mother as if she were a lifeline, and Emma cradled her and whispered words of comfort that sounded shaky even to her own ears. Stood across the room, her arms folded, a cynical smile playing on her lips, and Emma straightened, holding her daughter protectively between them, and demanded to know what price Tessa sought for her release. And Tessa's smile faded, and she tapped a button on her cuff, and the lights in the room dimmed, and the door sealed shut behind Emma with a hiss, leaving them trapped. And Tessa spoke in a low voice that dripped with menace, declaring that Emma had fallen into her trap, and that to earn her daughter's freedom she would have to surrender her greatest asset, her ownership certificate, and hand it over to Tessa's account. Before the countdown on the screen behind Emma's head reached zero, Emma's heart pounded as she looked at her daughter's tearful face, and then at the digital timer ticking away seconds, and she realized with a sick twist of betrayal that Tessa had orchestrated this moment to strip her of everything she held dear. And as the timer slipped toward its final seconds, Emma tightened her grip on her daughter and lifted her chin and whispered a vow that no threat could break, and with a burst of courage she lunged toward the console to override the timer and cut power to the lockdown mechanism. And the screen flickered and the countdown froze at 10 seconds, and Emma slammed her palm down on the emergency release button, and the door swished open just as the timer blinked. 18 seconds, and they collapsed through the exit into the corridor, battered but intact, and Emma clutched her daughter with relief flooding her chest. Yet as they staggered forward toward freedom, Emma caught sight of a figure stepping from the shadows, her face hidden by the hood of a dark coat, and she froze as the person removed the hood, revealing not Tessa but another familiar face that Emma had never expected to see, standing beside the woman who had betrayed her. And the cold realization struck that the conspiracy reached deeper than she had imagined, and that even here among the darkness her enemies had planned for every move. And as the figure reached forward, Emma's daughter let out a small gasp, and Emma braced herself for the next blow in this deadly game that refused to end. Emma stepped back into the light, feeling a surge of triumph wash through her as her daughter tugged at her sleeve. Her security team moved to surround them, offering silent protection as Emma led her daughter toward the waiting black SUVs. She paused for a moment, lifting her daughter into her arms, and whispered words of comfort and strength, so clear and pure that her daughter's tears turned into a small brave smile, and looked up to see her adversaries emerging from the shadows, cuffed and defeated in the glare of the floodlights. Tessa Hart knelt on the tarmac, her face pale with shock, and behind her stood the true mastermind, the executive Emma had once trusted, guiding the betrayal with greed and vengeance. They bowed their heads in shame as Emma strode forward, her posture regal and unbroken. She held the ownership certificate in her hand, like a torch illuminating truth, and she spoke with a calm voice that carried both mercy and justice. "He used my trust as a weapon and threatened my family to break me down, but in that moment I discovered my true power, and now you will face the consequences of your choices." Her words hung in the night air like a promise of reckoning. The mastermind tried to speak, but Emma cut through the silence with a simple verdict: "You are stripped of your position and your assets, and every lie you told will be laid bare before the world." Emma turned to her team, signaling that it was time to go home. She climbed into the front seat of the SUV, holding her daughter close, and as the doors closed, she stared ahead at the runway ahead, glowing with possibility. In that moment she understood that her greatest loss had forged her into a stronger leader, and that sometimes losing everything is the only way to find who you really are. The SUV roared to life, carrying Emma and her daughter toward dawn and a new beginning. The end.